All right, welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a few people coming in, but it's good to see you guys already here on time, on a Monday, no less. So thank you for joining us. We have some time. Feel free to come off mute and introduce yourself. Otherwise, please introduce yourself in the chat box. Tell us your name, tell us what your association is. You're a parent, you're a resident, you're just someone who's concerned about what's going on with gang policing. We'd love to know a little bit more about you. So please feel free to come off mute or share in the chat.
Marquise, why don't you call them one at a time?
Ooh, see, Miss Beverly comes to my Sunday meetings, so I like to put people on the spot. So I have been given instructions. I'm gonna start calling on you guys, and please just quickly come off of mute and just say hello, tell us who you are, what your association is, and maybe if you're feeling talkative, one thing you hope to get out of today's conversation. So who is the lucky person to get us started? I am gonna go with, is it Elena Roy? Is that correct?
Hi, yes, that's correct. Hello, okay. Yeah, my name is Elena Roy. I am a social worker with the Center for Court Innovation and the Supervised Release Program. So I'm here to learn more just because I'm always interested in contributing to anything justice reform related.
Thank you. And I have just one more task for you. You have the honor of choosing the next person.
Okay. Let's go with Julie Taylor.
Yes. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Julie. I also work at Center for Court Innovation, the Director of Community Impact and Youth Initiatives there. We are super proud members of the coalition. So happy to be here and support. Apologies, my camera's off because I'm also trying to feed my child and get her to go to bed fairly soon, but happy to be here. And I will pass it to Miss Beverly.
Miss Beverly.
Yes, my name is Beverly McFarland. I wear a couple of hats. I'm the Resident Association President for Senator Robert A. Taft Houses. I am a county committee person. I'm a judiciary delegate alternate, and a mother of two.
Thank you. You want to pick someone to pass the ball to?
Yes, I'll pass it to Christopher Miller.
All right.
I guess he's having problems. I guess Kevin Jason.
Kevin Jason.
Hey, good evening, everyone. My name is Kevin Jason. I'm a longtime Brooklyn, New York resident, but I'm here not only as a community member, but also I work with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and this gang policing is an issue that's very important to us. So happy to be part of this conversation. I'll pass it to Eva Stevenson.
Eva, we're going to start with Eva and get the program started. For the rest of you, please start putting the information in the chat. But Eva, please introduce yourself. Going once, twice. All right, we're gonna get this program rolling. So I am gonna ask the amazing people at the Gangs Coalition to get us rolling by sharing the screen. So again, I just want to thank each and every one of you for showing up today. We have an amazing crew of folks joining us today, an amazing lineup of speakers. But let's start off with some introductions. So my name is Marquise Jenkins, and I'm a community organizer, and I'm a proud member of the Gangs Coalition. The Gangs Coalition is a call and response. But before we talk about the Gangs Coalition, I'm going to jump into some housekeeping. All right, so we're gonna have a great list of speakers that are gonna be here today, and we wanna make sure that we are able to hear everyone. So as we are going through the program, we're gonna ask that you put all of your microphones on mute. We're going to mute them, but if in case we forget, please mute your microphone. If you are on a tablet or phone, look for a microphone icon, and right under it, it says mute. You can click on and off to turn it. If you are calling in on a phone, you can press *6 to mute and unmute. There will be times where we're asking you to come off of mute, like I did in the introduction. So again, you just *6 or click the mute icon. Next slide, thank you. Speaker view and gallery view. This is probably my favorite Zoom feature. What's cool about this is in gallery view, we get to see everyone. And to me, it feels like we are in community, right? I get to see all of you. You know, I feel like I'm in a community center and we're all talking about a real serious problem. But then you have the best of both worlds where you can go to speaker view, because sometimes we really want to focus in on what it is that the speaker is saying. And so in order to do that, if you are on a tablet or a smartphone, you can swipe left or right, and you should be able to go from gallery view to speaker view. If you are on a computer, it's either on your top left or your top right side. There is an icon that says gallery view. You can click on that to move from gallery view to speaker view. Next slide, please. Q&A. We are going to, again, ask you to come off of mute, but as we are in discussion with our speakers and as our speakers are presenting, we ask you to please pop those questions in the chat box. We're going to try to get to as many of those questions as possible. We're also going to share the questions with our panel of speakers so that they can follow up and answer any questions that we may have missed. So please make sure and include your questions in the chat box. The Gangs Coalition. The Gangs Coalition, I always get the name wrong, it's long, but it is the dopest coalition name I have ever heard of. So the grassroots advocates for neighborhood groups and solutions, Gang Coalition is made up of organizers, that's me, experts, legal advocates, and directly impacted community members. And we seek to abolish the surveillance and the criminalization tools predicated on association, including gangs or crew labels. So I know that was long, but basically our people are being targeted. They have found a new way to target our young people by associating them and labeling them as gang members. This coalition is a call to action. Family members who are directly impacted by gang takedowns. And we're not talking about simply the families who loved ones were taken into custody. We're talking about entire communities that are impacted by these gang takedowns, were fed up, were harmed by these gang takedowns and reached out. And we formed this coalition to address this major issue that is not only happening here in New York, but all across the country. You've heard a lot of gang talk, especially from our former president, Donald Trump. The words that comes out of the president's mouth and out of our elected official mouths really do have huge impacts. And because of those words, there have been gang takedowns all over the country. But primarily, and why it's so impactful for me, is largely these gang takedowns are happening in public housing developments, where it's largely poor people of color who live in these developments. Next slide. So we have a packed agenda for you today. I'm excited to dive right in. We just got into our welcome. We're going to discuss how the gang takedowns hurt our community. We have some directly impacted folks who are going to share with you today. Sorry, phone calls coming in. We have some directly impacted folks who are going to speak. We have Taylon Murphy. He is the father and founder of the Tashana Chicken Murphy Foundation. We're also going to talk about the gang database. We have Professor Babe Powell from the CUNY School of Law. We're going to talk about the legal impacts of gang database prosecution and gang allegations with MK, with Brooklyn Defender. Sorry, I just like said MK. MK is such a cool name. With MK from Brooklyn Defender Services, Professor Fahid Ahayat from CUNY School of Law. Forgive me because I'm horrible, as you can see. We're going to talk about how the gang databases are targeting our community. And then we're going to talk about the NYPD's gang database policy. Begin to shape the conversation around what is the solution to all of these problems. And we want to hear from you about your ideas, what you understand from what you heard today. So we're going to close with an open discussion where we're going to invite everyone to come off of mute and join us in an open discussion. Next slide. So without further ado, my brother, my mentor, and someone who is going to just move you to your core today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Taylon Murphy Sr., founder of the Tashana Chicken Murphy Foundation. Taylon, I give the floor to you.
Good evening. How you doing? I'm sorry, can everybody hear me? I'm on the road and things kind of like chopping in.
We could hear you. What I might recommend, just so that we can get clear audio, is maybe you turn your camera off. Taylon, you're on mute now. Apologies, we're gonna get them on. We're gonna do a little bit of troubleshooting, and I'm gonna get in trouble for this one right now, but I'm about to pivot. I see you looking at me. We're gonna have to pivot and come back to Taylon Murphy. But as I mentioned, amongst the population that is hit hardest by the gang database and consequently by these gang takedowns is the public housing community. You'll hear more details about one of the largest gang takedown in New York City's history, which took place at the Eastchester Gardens public housing. But there have been a number of takedowns in multiple public housing developments. So this speaker that I'm bringing to you next is Ms. Beverly McFarland. Among the many titles that she has, she is the Resident Association President of Taft Houses. Taft Houses is a development that was hit hard by a gang takedown. And she's going to share just the impact of how the entire community was harmed by this gang takedown. So without further ado, I give you Ms. Beverly McFarland.
Good evening, everyone. As Marquise, and thank you for inviting me to speak. As Marquise said, this happened maybe about 5-6 years ago. It was a gang takedown actually in Johnson Project, which is adjacent to my development. And it was over 5 residents, youth that got taken down and on this gang. And then they found out, they said they was on a gang database list. Half of these children were not even, they were just guilty by association, but they got 5 years in prison. So now they are coming out to what? NYCHA do not allow convicted felons to re-enter their homes. They are not allowed to come back into society. What are we have now? These 105 youth that hasn't been impacted, and half of them were not. They just was guilty by association. They knew a gang member. So the effects of it was horrible. I mean, in terms of, it was just really demeaning to our youth, because most of them were not gang members. I was happy to find out later on. I spoke to a Dan Courts, which the assemblyman at the time came to my community meeting, my member meeting, and he had told us about the FOIL. And that was a way of my members, and I have 107 members on my membership, and for them to see if their child is on, they will be on this FOIL. I mean, by FOILing, and they'll find out if they're on this list. And beknownst to us, half of my residents were on, their child was on, including myself, was on this FOIL. So, and my child would never ever had any problem, never trouble. First of all, he never hung up out in the street, because I have structured play for my children. And so we were just, it was just baffling to me that to find out half of my residents that requested this FOIL, their child was on this by just guilty by association. So if my child would have ever got picked up in the street for anything, he would have been labeled as a gang member because he was on this gang database list. So the impact of this list, to me, it just needs to be abolished, period. They need to shut that down altogether, because if they're not going to have the correct statistics on these gang members, then they need to not, if just by association. We live here. We know the problem, children. And it's also economically. There's problems because it's the economic problems in our neighborhood. I have 1,500 units, 9 buildings, but I don't have a community space. So how can we empower our residents if we don't have community spaces for our residents? But yet they put them on gang database lists. So this has to be stopped today. This has to be abolished today, because it is affecting my Black and brown community, and it could have been impacting my son in a way that it would have been devastating to my family. Thank you, Maki.
Thank you, Ms. McFarland. And it hurts every time I hear you share the story. And so I just want to thank you, because you are very vocal and you are working with us. And many people don't really get to understand sort of the many different roles that a tenant association president plays at the development. Many people only see the family days. I say that to ask you, when this gang takedown took place in your development, can you talk a little bit about sort of the role that the tenant association had to play in addressing all of the harms that followed that takedown?
Well, like I said, the takedown actually was in the adjacent, but some of the youth in my community was impacted. So it impacted the families financially, because now we have to find attorneys or get public offenders in order to get these kids off. And of course, if you don't have money, where are you going to be? You're going to stay in jail. it impacted, we didn't have a community-based kind of organization to guide our families in the right direction. A lot of the residents, they took them out of school. A lot of these youth was taken out of their classrooms. They was in class. So how, if they are part of the gang, why are they sitting in their classrooms? And they was taken out of their homes. So it's just, again, the dynamics of it is that now, what are we doing with these youths that spend 5 years of their lives in prison for no reason at all, just because they were labeled a gang? A gang can be anything. What's the definition of a gang? I have 12 brothers and sisters. Does that make us a gang? What is defines the definition when they say gang members? Because you see 6 children walk into a basketball court, is that a gang? So it's just the impact was very traumatic for my residents and their families, both economically and spiritually and mentally. It was heart-wrenching.
Thank you so much, Ms. McFarland. And please hang out as long as you can. I know that you have to go. But folks, if you have some questions for Ms. Beverly McFarland, please drop them in the chat. We're gonna get them to her and try to get as many of those questions answered as possible. I just want to thank you for always taking lead, always stepping up, especially when I call you at the last minute. You are here for me. So thank you so much for joining us, and stay as long as you can, please. Ms. Beverly asks a very important question. What does it mean to be a gang member? And the truth is, it's not illegal to be in a gang, right? Another word for gang is you are in a friendship. You have a group of people who you associate with, who you trust with your life, right? Whether it is the people you go play soccer with, whether it's the people you sit on the corner and hang out and talk trash with. The group of people you decide to hang out with is the people you feel most comfortable. And the NYPD has found a way to criminalize those relationships. So to help us break down and understand a little bit more from the data, we have Professor Babe Howe here from the CUNY School of Law. Professor Babe did a report on the Bronx 120 takedown, which is the largest gang takedown in New York City. I'm not going to do her any justice because her work will just blow you away and it needs no introduction. So without further ado, I pass the mic on to Babe Howe.
Thank you, Marquise. I will share screen. Although what you just heard from Ms. McFarland and Marquise covers a lot of what I'm going to cover. I was actually asked to do more of a gang database 101. What is the gang database? Who is in it? And how do you get there? How is a gang defined? So I'll talk more about that than my Bronx 120 findings. But one of the most important ones, Ms. McFarlane already covered too, half the people that they bring in the gang sweeps, not gang members. So who is in the gang database? First, I think you all can see my slide. It is 99% not white, 66% Black, 32% Latino, they use the word Hispanic, and doesn't seem to have Proud Boys, Mafia, 3%ers, any criminal groups that are not Black. And by the way, how do you get in it? You do not need to be a criminal. In fact, that is the one qualification that you don't need. As Marquise already pointed out, being a gang member is not a crime. They add people to the gang database as young as 13. They have people who are as old as 76. So what is the criteria for being added to the gang database? They have 3 ways of documenting you as a gang member, or rather they call it a criminal group database. But once again, when they talk about it, they'll say gang database, and they do not include anyone but young Black and brown men in the database. So voluntary admission, but that can include your post to social media. If the NYPD, which has a surveillance unit that basically looks at social media of young men, if the NYPD say your post of a tattoo or a drawing or you with your friends is a criminal group, then that could be the admission as well. So one is voluntary admission. In LA, the Metro unit has been found on their videos to be making up self-admissions too. So they are prosecuting officers in the Metro unit for falsely saying that people have admitted gang membership. And I've certainly heard that from people myself. Sorry, my slide seems to be a little stuck. They also say another way to add you to the gang database is from 2 independent sources, but you may notice down here that their independent sources are precinct personnel, NYPD, intelligence, NYPD, school safety, NYPD, juvenile justice, NYPD, detective bureau, NYPD, oh, and Department of Corrections. So they get to have from 2 different places the NYPD claiming someone's a gang member. And finally, they use another set of criteria where they say you need 2. Once again, none of this is being arrested or convicted or doing anything that's criminal. Being seen in your known gang location, which may be a bodega where folks hang out, a park, a basketball court, a street corner, gang-related documents, which again, they often look at rap lyrics and say that's gang-related, or the videos kids make for themselves, association with known group members. The list is secret, so you don't know if you're associating with known group members, but they could be your brothers, cousins, sisters, etc. Again, they look at social media, they have common tattoos, including tattoos that people like Drake and Tupac have. They say that that's gang membership. So they use what you look like, where you live and hang around, and who you know to add people to the gang database. And once again, those are 99% Black and Latino, and they are over 17,000 strong. And then question, why does it matter if you're labeled a gang member? This is very much gangs 101, many people here may know, but your police encounters will be more frequent and more dangerous. The NYPD boasts that everyone on their gang database has an average of 11 arrests and 5 felony arrests. The only way you could have that many felony arrests in New York is if you're being harassed. If you have 5 felonies in New York, you will already be in prison. So they make up charges, they say they're arresting you, and of course, it is more dangerous. When you are arrested, if you are arrested, bail will be denied entirely, as in if you're in federal court, or put at an exorbitant amount, 50,000, 100,000, amounts that hold people in jail, even though once again, the gang label has nothing to do with criminality. But judges are afraid to let someone out when the prosecutor stands up and says, this is a known gang member. Discovery, which is the documents that you need to figure out what the charges are and what you're accused of, and you really need time to look at that. Those are often late and with protective orders, so you can't get help to look through the documents it's a little bit complicated, but for lawyers, that's a very troubling denial of due process. Speedy trial will be suspended. So instead of getting you to trial in 6 months, they might take a year, 2 years, 3 years because they say the case is complicated. You will also be charged for the conduct of other people. Beverly McFarlane mentioned this, you know, you're getting swept up because of things other people did, and they say that that's a conspiracy or a RICO racketeering group. So, you know, even your parents can control what kids do. You certainly cannot control what your friends and acquaintances do, and yet you can be charged for that conduct, even when you're not involved, don't even know about it. The plea deals are incredibly harsh. Going back to the Bronx 120, half of them were not gang members. According to the prosecutor, 80 out of the 120 had never had a felony conviction before, but they were all forced to plead guilty to RICO racketeering felonies for things that had happened over a course of 9 years. You could either do that or go to trial and face very, very long sentences. The trials are not fair. They line up a bunch of cooperators who get very good deals, who will talk about how terrible the gangs are. You'll hear more about the legal impacts from MK and Fareed, but it's important. This gang database is secret according to them, but it has enormous impacts on the safety of people of color as they walk in the streets. And it essentially denies any form of due process once they're in court. And to be clear, whether you're a gang member or not, you should get due process. And finally, sentences are extremely long. I think I'll pause there because I forgot to even set my timer, and I will stop share and toss this. Oh, actually, I have one more slide that I want to share with you.
Yeah, we're good on time, so feel free to stretch a little.
What's a gang? That was a question that we heard earlier. And yes, you and 3 of your friends or 12 of your brothers could easily be a gang. This is the NYPD's definition from their patrol guide. It's a group of 3 or more people. It doesn't have to be a formal group. It's a group, they say, that has one of its primary activities as committing criminal acts, but that has been read as 2 acts in 10 years. And those acts could be done individually or collectively. So you could have a group where, you know, a group of friends where some smoke weed or somebody sells it to, and now I guess weed is not a good example, but you know, where some use drugs or some shoplift or some do this or that because of their circumstances. And yet highlighted here, we see that the crimes could be done individually. So the gang's not actually organized around committing criminal acts. And most often it's actually the NYPD will say they're a crew. And often it's just a neighborhood group that grows up together. So we're throwing people into gang databases, not because they're in big gangs, not because there's any kind of organization, but because of their friendship groups. And the intelligence, gang intelligence, even goes to trying to take part in protest or marches and protesting police brutality. So it's very troubling way of kind of criminalizing association and controlling whole segments of the society so they cannot stand up for their communities and their rights. And by the way, they also have another information management system that has person lights as well. So we've talked about the gang member who can be certified based on appearance, clothing, and association or where they live. The person light is someone they have even less information on, and they're presumably keeping information in this management system also on those, including annotated images and social media captures. So they are very much kind of stalking and databasing and keeping information on people from very young ages based on no criminality, and their database is entirely people of color. We do need to abolish it. In every other jurisdiction where they have tried tinkering around the edges, the databases have not become useful or relevant. It's not criminal behavior, so we should not be creating this enormous database that labels people in this harmful way. So thank you so much. I'm going to pass it back to Marquise.
Thanks, babe, so much for breaking that down to us, for us. What if I'm going to ask you if you could please drop a link or two in the chat box. If you guys have not read the Bronx 120 report, I am strongly recommending that you read it. It goes into full detail of the individuals who were impacted directly by the takedown. It is just jaw-dropping information that you see in there, especially when you compare it against all the media that's put out there about these thugs who are terrorizing neighborhoods. We're talking about 15-year-olds. We're talking about 13-year-olds. So please, you get a chance, check out that report. So we heard about who is being impacted. We heard about the data that they are collecting, right? This person lives in gang neighborhood. That's a public housing development. This person hangs out with gang members. Well, that's his cousin, his brother, and his uncle. This person is posting on social media. He is mimicking rap lyrics that he heard from one of his favorite rappers. All of this information is being collected in a database so that they can begin to launch these prosecutions. So to take us a little bit deeper into the legal impacts of gang databases, prosecution, and allegations, I'd like to hand the mic over to MK, who is a Brooklyn defender from Brooklyn Defender Services. Thank you, MK, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Like Marquis said, my name is MK Kashian. I'm really happy to be speaking with all of you. I'm a public defender. I'm also senior policy counsel with Brooklyn Defender Services. My work for most of the last year has primarily been city level policy work around policing, police misconduct, and gang prosecutions and policing, because that's where a lot of police misconduct happens. What we know right now about the gang database has been uncovered largely through the work of advocates and activists who are both impacted by gang policing and prosecutions and who have done the on-the-ground work of filing things like freedom of information requests on entities like the NYPD. Those include members of the GANGS Coalition, who are some of the most influential advocates on this issue. And it's truly my honor to work alongside people like Ms. Beverly, like Marquise, like Professor Howell, and to really be learning from them all the time. As a public defender, I get insight into the ways that police and prosecutors build so-called gang cases against people, primarily young Black and brown people, and the way that these cases are built over the course of years and years through surveillance, including of social media and music scenes, and through harassment by the police. And whether or not a case is a quote unquote gang case, a person's alleged affiliation is always making its way into proceedings in a case as a way to prejudice them. These labels are often the source of cases as well, as gang labeled people are constantly being targeted by police, as Professor Howell broke down for you. I won't give you those stats again, but it's very, very clear that people who are gang labeled are then more likely to be stopped by the police, especially for broken windows levels offenses, because police will effectively go on what's called a fishing expedition to see if they can build bigger cases off of nuisance level arrests. New York State does not have gang enhancements for sentencing, but there are workarounds for this for cops and DAs. Police identified gang members are targeted for harassment and abuse by the police. They are then charged with inchoate, which means planning crimes, and crimes by association rather than specific criminal offenses. And then they're targeted and warehoused for complex prosecutions. These prosecutions, even those made by the most quote unquote progressive DAs, are built on the racist and classist work of gang policing. They rely on racist assumptions about the rights of gang labeled people, and they damage communities and young people, including those I've represented, for life. The criteria for designation in this 99% non-white database include living in a known gang area, association with gang members, and other criteria that Professor Howell covered. The NYPD claims that people are not on this database for their lifetime, but there's no mechanism for ensuring that that's true. And there's frankly no reason to believe them. It's not as though the NYPD has a track record of either transparency or accountability. And of course, as is true in any moral panic, we end up with fear-driven policies. And in this instance, police and prosecutors are allowed to circumvent due process for gang-labeled people by effectively saying, but they're gang members, they're dangerous, therefore we can do whatever we deem necessary when we're prosecuting and policing them. The database is also riddled with errors. I've represented people who are incorrectly identified as gang members when they do not identify with a specific crew. I've also represented people who are misidentified as belonging to a certain group. So more than one young person that I have represented personally has reported to me that police will loudly tell them things like, you're in the wrong neighborhood for a member of this crew. And not only are the police wrong, but they're then calling attention to this person and placing them at risk. But I want to be clear, we don't want to engage with the dangerous binary of the deserving versus the undeserving. This person should be on the gang database and this person should not. Therefore, we need it to be more correct, or we want a more clear definition of what a gang is. We reject that outright here at the Gangs Coalition. People who may fit what many people believe to be the definition of a member of a crew or a gang are still fully deserving of their rights, including the freedom to associate. And this database works to undermine all of those rights and for no legitimate public safety purpose. I want you to think about what Ms. Beverly said to you here tonight about what happened in her community. The NYPD surveils children and young adults, sometimes for years, without alerting parents that their children are in trouble or without any sort of interventions. Not that we would, want the police to be providing that anyway, but think about who they're really serving here. And young people have also described to me how police actively attempt to use the database to inflame tensions through actions such as playing diss tracks from squad cars while driving slowly through certain neighborhoods, while taunting people with their alleged gang label. And I'm going to ask us all to think about here tonight whether we believe that a department that behaves this way constantly is interested in public safety, or simply their ability to compile limitless information on everyone and to pacify and control policed people. And this is why we don't want a better database. We want an abolished database. The level of surveillance and power that the NYPD has is frankly something out of a dystopian nightmare, and it could be its own CLE or conversation that could take up an entire evening. But there are billions and billions of data points, including probably on everyone on this call, that is available on the cell phones of all 36,000 NYPD officers. And the gang database is both a symptom of this problem and a contributing factor. The information in the gang database is used in other data analysis by the NYPD, and it's fed into other networks. And what we need to believe is that there is a garbage in, garbage out process happening. They're getting fed racist information, false information, harmful information, and then they're using that to make a ton of policing decisions, some of which we don't even know about. And what does it look like for us at the state level when people's due process rights are overridden because they're on the gang database? What that looks like to us is reporters being tipped off to gang raids before defense counsel knows about it. Even if people are represented, the New York Post gets a ride along, they get to perp walk young children through the streets. A person's alleged gang status is used when arguing for their bail status, regardless of the relevance to the charge against them. You can't let this person out, judge, they're a gang member, and then the judge sets bail because they don't want the New York Post to cover them in case something bad happens later on. It's just this whole process that goes on. It's basically like a code word to get a judge to reactively put someone in prison or jail. And I want to put that in context. We are in the middle of a humanitarian acute crisis on Rikers Island and in city jails. It is always a dangerous place to be. There are always dangerous places to be, especially for young people. But 10 people have died just in the last 8 months. Just today, elected officials and incoming officials as well went on a visit to Rikers Island, where some of them witnessed someone attempt to take their own life. And this was a visit that the DOC was prepared to invite elected officials on. They can't hide how bad things are, and yet a person's gang status is still being used to send young people there in very high numbers. The population continues to rise. Discovery laws are circumvented. Prosecutors withhold critical information such as witness names, again, relying simply on the accused's alleged gang affiliation. You can't give the defense this information, judge. They're an alleged gang member. And again, the same process happens and the rights are circumvented. Speedy trial rights are circumvented. The fact that police have been surveilling people for so long means that they've generated more documents and reports than for someone who's maybe not on the database and who hasn't been victimized by a lifetime of police harassment. Therefore, prosecutors get more time than they would otherwise need to compile the information that they have against them. So it's just this self-fulfilling prophecy. And even prosecutorial efforts at so-called alternatives to incarceration involve major input from the NYPD, to the point that the department is able to veto individuals from eligibility for certain alternatives to incarceration programs, basically like precogs, based on their police determined likelihood to commit crimes in the future. And if it sounds crazy, that's because it is. And a lot of the way that they decide whether or not this person is likely to quote unquote reoffend is based on whether they're in the gang database. New York City also funds our version of Operation Ceasefire, which is purported to provide resources to at-risk gang labeled youth. But it's run by federal and state prosecutors and other federal agencies. And their tactics include sending threatening letters and unannounced home visits by police to people who are deemed gang affiliated, once again, violating the right to privacy, their freedom to associate, and many of their due process rights that they're entitled to. These letters also go to people who are actively represented by defense counsel.
I'm Jack.
In sum, gang policing criminalizes affiliation, and this practice is costly, both in human terms and fiscal terms. But the gang database provides the scaffolding for all of it to happen before anyone even sets foot in a courtroom. So thanks everyone for being here.
Thank you, MK, for breaking it down. Please, I am not seeing any questions pop up in the chat. I know I have a million questions, and I want to make sure that we have something to get us into our open discussion with. So please, if you have some questions for MK, she just dropped some heavy knowledge on you. Please put it in the chat box so that we can come back to it. I'm going to keep us rolling. We are still talking about the legal impacts. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to another professor from the CUNY School of Law, Professor Fareed Nassar Hayat. And I know I said that wrong, so please don't kill me. I'm horrible with names. It's no excuse, but forgive me, please.
Greetings, everyone. Very happy to be here with you all. And I'm going to try to focus on another aspect of gang prosecutions and kind of dig into two examples of some of those due process violations that MK was talking about or leading us down to. Specifically, I want to talk a little bit about the impermissible evidence that's used in gang cases that are just outright violations of our due process protections and our rules of evidence and a violation of law to allegedly punish gang members. And I also want to, build and highlight MK's point that, due process rights, the Constitution of the United States applies to everyone here. No matter what your status is, citizen-wise, gang member-wise, Muslim, or whatever, you are entitled to the rights of this Constitution by being in this space. And it's important for us to remember that, because not only does this concept that if we allow them to trample on the rights of the most despised, they'll eventually trample on us, but the most despised in and of themselves deserve these rights. So I shared in the chat 3 articles that I've written that really address various aspects of gang prosecution. So please, if you have an opportunity, click on any of them, download them, give them a read. I'm always open to discuss and talk more closely about it. I'm going to share my screen. I have a brief PowerPoint that I'll try to use. Sharing screen. All right, so talking gang prosecution specifically, so the danger of gang prosecution. Evidence that would otherwise be irrelevant and inadmissible comes into trials. Generally very inflammatory details about activities of a gang, even when the defendant is not involved. And this is a point that I'll build out a little later, but the concept is that that criminal defendant who may or may not be a notorious gangster will have to defend against an organization. The prosecutor is going to be allowed to prove up what a gang has done as opposed to what a defendant has done. And what makes that very difficult as a defense attorney or a defendant is you oftentimes don't know about those things and you don't have the ability to say that wasn't me because you had nothing to do with it. So essentially they move the criminal defendant in the position of the gang, and then the criminal defendant has to defend themselves against that entire organization's activity. The next thing that they do in gang prosecutions is the use of these so-called police gang experts. And I reiterate so-called experts because these individuals are police officers who work the beat, interact with alleged gang members. But what they do on a witness stand often is psychology or sociology or ethnography. They engage in science on the witness stand. They'll say, because I know gang members, this is what gang members do. This is the way gang members think. This is how gangs organize. This is what this sign means. This is what this word means. They become linguists and everyone else. But the truth of the matter is the qualifications to actually be able to come to court and say any of those things, these individual police officers do not possess. And when challenged under thorough cross-examinations, you're going to find that many of their theories and otherwise fall apart. But these gang experts make gang prosecutions because where there are holes in cases, meaning there is no evidence to prove an individual committed a particular crime, gang experts will close those holes with things that cannot and oftentimes simply did not occur. Gang prosecution, to be prosecuted under a gang statute in both the federal context, and though New York doesn't have a gang prosecution statute, under the federal gang statute, you have to prove that there are two or more persons committing a crime or participating in the gang organization in furtherance of a gang. And what does that mean? That means that an example of what you would think in furtherance mean is hey, I'm committing a drive-by, I'm going to kill a rival gang member. I'm a gang member, I'm going to kill a rival gang member. That's what you would think in furtherance of a gang would be. But it will go to something as small as I created a rap song that talks about gang banging and gang members committed a crime. Thus, I furthered the gang. Or it can go as small as I stole white t-shirts because I like white t-shirts, but you will be found guilty of robbery in furtherance of the gang because that gang wears white t-shirts. So the extension of what any crime one individual can do, not involving anyone else, to become the crime of the gang and thus making these third-party members liable, there is no limit. There is no felony requirement for it. It can be minor misdemeanors to very serious crimes, okay? And with these gang prosecutions, because they're done under a conspiracy kind of approach, it means that that individual who was not there, who didn't know that that crime was going to take place, and who did not say, yeah, go commit that crime, can be liable for that crime and receive the entire sentence. Meaning someone, a third party person commits a crime and he's a member of your gang. Maybe, maybe not, but say he is. He commits a murder in furtherance of the gang. If you're prosecuted under that gang statute, for that murder, the conspiracy of the murder, meaning I've agreed to commit crimes on behalf of the gang, you can also get that life sentence. And that's that power that these prosecutions have, because individuals who have no criminal record at all are threatened with life sentences. And as a result, they plead. They don't take the chance. And now they end up with serious felonies when they have committed no real crime. In order to be guilty of a gang violation, defendant must commit a crime in furtherance of a gang. They call those predicate acts. And the predicate act, it's not the same standard as proof beyond a reasonable doubt. They don't have to prove it to the same level. Gang statutes allow prosecutors to tell juries about gang crimes unrelated to the defendant. So as Professor Howe mentioned, they have to prove that crimes occur in furtherance of the gang. They have to prove a gang exists. So number one, they're going to be able to come talk about 2, 3, 4, 5 other people other than you just to prove a gang exists. Now, and they'll bring in the worst of the worst. They'll bring in the face tattoos. They'll bring in as dangerous as a person could look and say, look at these members. You're in the court, you look like a choir boy. Next, they'll have to prove that this gang, that these 3 members that they just identified commit crimes. Well, they're going to go bring in that murder and this murder and that robbery, things that they may can prove that those individuals did. But they're attempting to prove that this gang, meaning these individuals, commit crimes. So your jury gets to hear about the murders that those 3 people commit, the robberies that those 3 people commit. And all they can prove about you is, oh, well, you associate with those people. And like that is what the problem lies, is because you can't defend against their case on whether they've committed a crime or not. Example, I tried a gang case in Baltimore City, and this individual was originally suspected for committing a murder. And they investigated the case from top to bottom, talked to the witnesses, and the prosecutor, after about a year of investigation, decided not to bring the case. The prosecutor said, hey, I don't have enough evidence to prosecute this individual for a gang case. The gang statute passed in Maryland, so then they had the ability to connect crimes under this gang statute. So now he's charged with the gang statute. And in cross-examination, I was able to ask the detective, well, have you gotten any new evidence since the day of this incident to now suggest he actually did the crime? The answer was no. The only evidence that changes, now we can talk about other crimes that had nothing to do with that incident, and we believe we can get a guilty. There's been multiple studies done that shows that if you add gang evidence, any gang allegation to a criminal allegation, the jury is more likely to say guilty. Only because you say gangs were involved, not because any of the facts have changed whatsoever. So this evidence about multiple other murders and gang crimes, they contribute to a conviction that was insufficient to stand alone. Gang evidence is impermissible propensity evidence. And what does that mean? It means that, oh, well, he committed a crime before, so he committed the crime today. The gang committed crimes before, so obviously as a member of that gang, you committed those crimes. So we can see how that kind of logic is extremely flawed, and it creates accountability where accountability can't necessarily be proven at all. And this is extremely problematic. You know, as an advocate, I'm certainly suggesting what can we do about that? Well, one thing we can do, for those of you who are attorneys here on this call, you can file motions to bifurcate. You can say, Your Honor, I want to separate the gang allegation from the substantive crime. My client's charged with a murder, prove the murder first. And we get this rationale from, all of felon in possession of a firearm. Well, we know they don't get to go and prove the felony that your client took part in. You stipulate to that, and they only have to prove he's involved with a gun before the jury find out about him being a felon. So that kind of concept is something we have based in criminal law. In civil rights law, the case Monell, the court said outright, this is the United States Supreme Court, they say that if you can't prove an actual civil rights violation has occurred, then you don't get to talk about all of the bad things about, in that case, it was a police department that trained its dogs to attack Black skin. And the court said, hey, so what, the dogs are trained to attack Black skin? Did a civil rights violation occur? And in that particular case, the court found that, hey, that dog was supposed to attack him. So the fact that he would have attacked him anyway because he had Black skin is irrelevant. So the argument is, Your Honor, my client committed a robbery, a murder, or whatever else. Prove he did that, because as the panelists before him said, just because he's a gang member is not a crime. It's only a crime committed in furtherance of the gang. So prove a crime has occurred before you can talk about it was in furtherance of the gang. And that will create some kind of due process. It will create some level of fairness. So bifurcation will help ensure that any conviction is based on beyond a reasonable doubt of the crime charge, rather than character judgments of individuals. And these character judgments are steeped in white supremacy. It's steeped in culture.
Wow.
And then I'll talk about the last part that I wanted to highlight in terms of the prosecutions. It's the use of gang experts. And these gang experts who, as they identify, lie about self-identification, who claim they know things that they don't know. Most of them only have to have 2 of 10 potential indicators that you're a gang member. And these indicators can be they can be, you are a real gang member, you got the gang tattooed on your chest, but it also can be you are seen with 2 or 3 people from the gang, or you're seen in a neighborhood regularly of the gang. Or in my case, it was that you use this sign, which we all know is a peace sign. And the gang expert testified that if you associate with gang members and you use those signs, those are 2 indicators of gang affiliation, and they would certify you as a gang member, thus you can be prosecuted under it. Final point that I will make.
Final point.
The final point is that, prosecutors get what they're doing. They understand, and one former prosecutor, Alec Jackson, wrote in an article that he was going around to different prosecutors' offices sharing. He says the easiest way to get gang evidence admitted to trial is by filing a substantive gang charge or enhancement allegation. Once the charge of enhancement is filed, everything that a gang expert says now becomes relevant. So this is what he was going to the offices teaching. Just file a gang charge, and then you can say whatever you want. This is the problem with gang policing, gang prosecutions, and as a result, the gang database. Thank you.
The gang coalition is so lucky to have the dream team, the legal dream team working for them. Brother, thank you so much for breaking that down. There was a lot to digest in that. So I hope that you guys have gotten your questions written down. I'm still gonna bug you guys about using that chat box. Just a quick wake you up activity, and it's connected to what we just heard. So very quickly, and I just need to know you guys know how to use the chat box. When you hear the word love, that's L-O-V-E. When you hear the word love, what comes to mind? What are you automatically associating with that word love? So please drop it in the chat box. I'm just gonna call out 1 or 2 of the words. So I'm not seeing you guys, come on, I need some activity. Some activity, I'm gonna give you a couple of seconds. Let's see, we got someone was brave enough to go in there. All right, here we go. We got caring, community, family, action, safety, God, support, and caring. So what's the point of this activity? It's really what I want you to understand, how one word can have so many different associations, meanings, and connection for people. The word gang has been perverted so much by the NYPD that when you hear it, you already have a vision of what the NYPD is talking about, because there are all these things that have been associated with it. And we are not unique, right? When that word is used in the courtroom, it taints everything that follows it. You can't hear anything but the word gang and see all of those images that have been stored in your brain from the NYPD, from what you watch on TV to what you listen to in the media. So I really want you to challenge that thought, that impulse, right? When you hear the word gang, especially as we talk about public housing and public housing residents and how they interact in their communities. So I promise you that we are not here today simply to complain and to vent and to tell you that we lived in a messed up world. I promise you, we are working very hard. We're working tirelessly to address this issue and make sure, right, that we address it systemically and not allow something to be recreated in its place. So as we begin to think about solutions, whether it is on the streets, in the courtroom, or the legislature, I want you all to take a pledge today to work with us to address this issue. To learn a little bit more about what we're thinking and what we're working on as it relates to some solutions, I'm going to give the floor up to one of our very own professors who has been doing amazing work, who also has a book. He's going to drop the link to his book out there so you guys could get a copy. But I really want you to give your full attention to Professor Alex Vitale. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. You have the floor.
Thank you, Marquise. Why don't you can take that slide down. I'm so glad everyone was able to join us this evening for this very important conversation. What I put in the chat was a link to a report that we wrote at the Policing and Social Justice Project about gang policing in New York City. And one of the main things we said in the report is that the decision to frame the city's problems as problems of gangs to be managed by gang suppression policing is a political decision. It does not have to be that way. It is not that way in every city, and it has not been that way for much of New York City's history. For many decades, New York City intentionally and consciously avoided framing the city's problems as gang-related, because they understood that by doing that, they ran the risk of actually making the problem worse. And this is exactly what we've seen in cities like Chicago and Los Angeles and Oakland that have spent literally generations trying to stamp out gangs through ever more intensive and ultimately abusive and unjust forms of policing. And invariably, when we tell police they are the solution to all our community problems, there will be abuse, there will be violence, there will be injustice, and it will be focused on the most vulnerable communities in our society and the most vulnerable young people in our society. Now, for several decades, New York City dealt with problems of youth violence through much more of a social inclusion strategy and a social welfare strategy. The city said, what we need to do is we need to understand that young people come together into associations out of needs for mutual protection, mutual empowerment, sociability, fun. And yes, sometimes their activities can include harmful behavior, whether it's shoplifting or harmful drug use or violence. But rather than trying to imagine that we can stamp out that fundamental need for young people to associate with each other, we should harness that desire for solidarity among these young people as a tool for trying to improve these communities. We should bring these young people and their associations into a process of consultation with government to try to identify what the problems are in the community, what the needs of young people are, and to work together to try to develop strategies to make these communities better places. But in the period about 10 years ago, the NYPD, who has basically been told they are the solution to almost every problem in the city, that they have been put on a pedestal, that they can do no wrong. They've been given total impunity, total authority over everything. And they've been told it's all up to them. They said, well, if that's the case, we're going to now take control of how we think about the city's youth problems and violence problems. And we're going to begin to call this a gang problem. For many decades, gang-related crime was deemed to be extremely low. But when the NYPD made this strategic political decision to reframe this as a gang problem, they doubled the size of the gang unit, they completely revamped the gang database, and now all of a sudden, every year, more and more crimes are classified by the police unilaterally as gang related, thus self-justifying their process of gang labeling and their demand for ever more resources and authority. Now, recently, we have heard, well, the city's putting money into cure violence, advance peace, the neighborhood action plan from the mayor's office. And some of these are very encouraging developments that we support. But it's important that we hold the mayor accountable for the city's true primary strategy for addressing problems of violence in communities, which is ever more intensive, invasive, and discriminatory policing. The money that's currently being allocated to community-based violence reduction efforts is an infinitesimal drop in the bucket compared to the $10 to $11 billion a year we spend on policing. So that when the mayor gets up and has a big press conference because he put $5 million into advance peace, but $11 billion into policing, we need to demand that those priorities be reversed. And further, when we hear this incredibly lopsided set of priorities, and then we're told, well, we don't have enough evidence that community-based strategies can solve all our problems. We need to push back and say, when have you really tried community-based strategies? When has it ever really been more than a press release and a publicity stunt? Where are the real resources? When the city spends more on community-based interventions than it does on policing, then we should begin to have that conversation about exactly what really works. So again, I want to thank you for joining us in this important endeavor. This is not just a legal question. This is not just a legislative question. It is at core a political question. And the political leadership of the city have to be held accountable for what is essentially the mass criminalization of young Black and brown people. Thank you.
Well put. Thank you, Alex. We are definitely about to jump into some discussion. I want to know what all of you have heard today. I'm going to continue to stress, as what you heard throughout these conversations, that what we really are talking about is the criminalization of association. And rather than telling people that the folks that they choose to be around with, the people, right, that they choose to associate with, that is human nature. They have figured out a way to criminalize human nature. Our need to associate with one another, be in community with one another, is now being threatened. But what if this rule was colorblind, if you will? What if we looked at the NYPD in the same way, with the murder of Michael Brown, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and the list, unfortunately, goes on and on? Would we penalize the entire police department and arrest them and take them in? All the criteria that are being used to classify individuals as gang members could be used to classify the NYPD, the sorority or fraternity you are a part of, the knitting club that you are a part of. It's no coincidence, though, that it's only being targeted and used towards people of color. Again, I ask you to continue to stay involved and be a part of this. I want to know, what did you hear today? Do you have any questions? Do you have any ideas for how we might continue to move forward. Can you volunteer? And what type of services can you volunteer? So please take this time to come off of mute, and I want to hear from you all. So is there anyone who'd like to get us started with a comment, question, or suggestion?
It's a great question in the chat right now.
Let's see, you wanna just shout it out for me, Joseph?
Sure. This is from Craig. I think it's directed to any of the speakers, but anyone can chime in. Curious to hear about any speakers' thoughts on likely incoming Mayor Eric Adams on how they may or may not affect NYPD's actions towards this topic. Any of the speakers, or actually anyone on anyone in the forum, wanted to take a stab at that?
Listen, I'll take a stab at that. It scares me with this new mayor coming in. I'm speaking completely independent and not in representation of any organization or group of people. But it scares me because Eric Adams campaigned on a tough on crime platform. And I'm worried about having that type of mindset in the NYPD. There is an impulse to clean up the neighborhood and make it safe. And I believe that he will have an agenda that is more aggressive, that brings in more police officers, and that directs more funding towards policing as opposed to the community. So with that, I am concerned. But we've been down this road before. We've dealt with Giuliani. I don't want to have to go through everything we went with Giuliani. I say that to say that we are prepared to fight them tooth and nail to make sure that these type of policies are not expanded and that we are stopping them every step of the way. MK, I see you come into video. Did you want to chime in?
Not necessarily, but not to say too much. I just shared a link. He met with the Biden administration and attempted to tie gangs to some sort of surge in violence. Obviously we as a coalition, we as individuals take violence very seriously, and we would like to not see anyone be harmed. But to push the idea, first of all, that there is a sort of surge in crime, which is actually not supported by data, and to also try to blame it on gang labeled people is dangerous rhetoric, and he's already espousing that, and he's not even in office yet. So we have a lot of reasons to be very concerned about the policies that he'd push once he does take office. So I just echo everything that Marquis said as well.
Thank you. Anyone else want to respond to that question, or are there any other questions in the chat that I'm missing?
Marquise,
sorry.
I'm sorry, Marquise. I have a question. Wasn't the side Vance, wasn't he actually the person that started this gang database list, or am I mistaken? And if he is, wouldn't we go and start talking to the district attorneys to abolish this?
Excellent question. I'm gonna kick it to some of our speakers. Babe, you are off mute, so I'll kick it to you.
Sure thing. He definitely brought it into his office to focus gang prosecutions, to bring big conspiracy cases against crews. But the gang database pre-existed him. He just tightened up the collaboration between the prosecutor and the NYPD, and that has become a problem at the federal level, at the local level. We have met with all the district attorneys, and that's part of the work this coalition does too, asking them not to use gang allegations and to demand that we get rid of the database. It's work that we're doing. That the newly, Alvin Bragg is one of the people who was running for district attorney, and he's certainly like been responsive to the notion that we shouldn't use gang allegations so much, but he was not at the forefront. You know, he was kind of in the middle. So we'll see where we go. But that's part of the work of the coalition.
Thank you. Did anyone else want to weigh in? I think that was answered pretty well. We had someone else try to chime in for a question.
Hey, one thing I just wanted to say that I appreciate everybody on this phone call. Not enough people, at least in the circles that I frequent in academia, are willing to really talk about this subject without thinking punitive measures, you know? Mm-hmm. So one thing that I wanted to say about Eric Adams is I'm very concerned. I'm a college graduate, but I'm from the hood and always have been from the hood. Mm-hmm. My concern is that this summer, we're gonna hear a lot of fund the police chants, and he is going to target brown and black communities, and he's going to target gang members. One of the biggest things that I'm afraid of is that he's going to go and start pretty much raiding communities. One thing that I've always seen as I like research hidden populations is extreme raids of communities where piles of youth are collected and I never see them again. This is like kidnapping, you know, and it does concern me because gangster and gang is not a negative thing. The NYPD is the largest gang in New York City. Our gangs and our communities were always built to protect and to protect from outsiders like the NYPD, outsiders like gentrifiers. And for our white allies on the phone, I hope not to offend you, but these are some serious issues. And a lot of our brown, black, and yellow men and women are getting hurt in the process. I'm talking about women who are totally isolated because now their husbands, their brothers, their lovers have been labeled deviant. So when I think about Eric Adams, I think about the Giuliani time. And that scares me. That scares me. So I've been doing work with gangs in New York City for the past 3 years, specifically gang networks, but hidden networks for the past 10 years, right? And during the pandemic, I saw so many gang members suffering. But in that same token, I saw so many gang members helping communities survive financially while the state left us behind. So nobody talks about those stories. And when we're talking about Eric Adams coming to clean up the streets, he's not only coming to clean up the streets for guns, he's coming to clean up the streets because New York City is not as vibrant as it used to be. People are afraid to come to New York City. So it also has like this capitalistic overtone kind of chiming in. And again, we're getting caught in the system. So I appreciate everybody on this phone call because this shows me that there are people out there who are bold enough to say no and to point out the contradictions in our own system. If we're supposed to be community helpers and community healers, we have to start with gangs. So I'm really encouraged by this phone call. If we're gonna start building up any type of organizations across New York City with gang fronts to help advocate for a new system of policing, of community policing, we're gonna have to get on the ground now. I'm just meeting a lot of you for the first time ever, but the work that I do allows me to have a lot of access to a lot of hidden networks in New York City, which I'm sure many of you on this phone call do as well. So I think if you ever had like a follow-up meeting where, you know, we all had another Zoom where we started to think about how we can get community together, that would be awesome.
You are setting me up. You leading me right into my closing. But before I get into my closing, tell me your name, please.
My name is Angelica Camacho, but everybody calls me Ange.
All right, Ange. I just want to say welcome home. It is
good
to have you here with us. We need you to be a part of this team. We have been fighting strong ever since that big takedown at Eastchester Gardens, and we need people like you to be a part of us. So now that we got you, we're not letting you go. You are officially part of the GANGS Coalition. And I mean that for each and every one of you folks out there who took the time out of your Monday to come and learn and be educated on what's going on. As I mentioned, we didn't call you here simply so that we can complain and tell you how they are targeting our community, just like they've been targeting us for the past 250 years. For 250 years, we have been fighting and we will continue to fight. Today's event was the start or the kickoff to our week of action. On Wednesday, we have a press conference. I would love if each and every one of you are able to join us. I'm sure we have a slide with some additional information, or if nothing else, to help me make sure I don't miss any of my points in closing. Thank you. See, teamwork, make the dream work. So we have some action steps. So what you heard today, please go out there, social media, and spread the knowledge. Just make sure you include the hashtag erase the database. Tell local officials, some of you are on this call. I'm hoping that some of you are going to keep on sailing right into city council and become official council members and ambassadors of the work that we are doing today. But if you are not running for office and you are not interested in running for office, we need you to talk to the person who is, or the person who represents you currently in office. In NYC, if you are in NYC on Wednesday, outside on the west wing of City Hall, we are going to be holding a press conference at 11 a.m. With Council Member, see, yeah, I really tested my memory today. Anthony Reynoso, did I get that right?
Yeah.
Yes. Councilmember Anthony Reynoso is going to be making a huge announcement, and you do not want to miss it, because we are going to be working on solutions, and it's going to bring us one step closer to erasing, permanently getting rid of this database. We also, as I mentioned, social media, on Friday, we are going to have a Twitter rally. So we are looking forward to all of you being there. The good news about this rally is that you can be anywhere that has Wi-Fi. Anywhere to participate in this rally. Is not going to be a long, drawn out, let's walk around the entire neighborhood rally. It is simply a couple of tweets and retweets. So we hope that you would do some tweeting and retweeting with us on Friday. Now that we have your information, we are also going to be sending you a follow-up email. There's a article. We did our last press conference. We were in front of our last press conference. We were in, no, keep that up, please. Our last press conference, we were in front of the IG office, demanding that they do a investigation and issue out a report on the NYers gang policing practices and policies. There was an article that we're going to drop in the chat. The good news is that the IG's office heard our calls and they felt the pressure, and they have responded by saying that a report is in the works, it's almost done. So very soon you're going to be hearing, or the IG's office is going to be issuing out a report. So stay tuned for that.
The link to the report is in the chat, but it's also, I'm also going to bring it up on the screen to show everyone.
Thank you. And then I have one last update that I want to talk about, and then we could end. I do want to acknowledge that we are 6 minutes over time, so I am humbly gracious that you've decided to stay on extra time with us, and I'm not going to keep you too much longer. All right, so here we are with the article. It is in the chat box, so please, I think we might actually be putting together a toolkit for all the links that were dropped today. So there will be a follow-up email that we send to all of you. My team is gonna kill me for giving them extra homework, but it makes sense, right? Last thing I want to talk about is the infrastructure bill. What does the infrastructure bill have to do with policing? So you know that there are two infrastructure bills that are out there. There is the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, which just got passed. And right next to that, or just past one of the chambers, excuse me, there is a $350 billion infrastructure spending bill. As part of that infrastructure bill, an elected official whose last name is Hawley, so someone's gonna have to help me here. I am at a blank for words. Is proposing that the money that goes into that will also be used to hire 100,000 more police officers. So I want you to think about that 100,000 number. As we're talking about the police coming into our communities, that is 100,000 more police officers sent to our communities to lock up our young people under false pretenses that they are gang members, to lock up and kill our people. As I mentioned, Michael Brown, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so on. That is 100,000 more potential Danny Pantaleos that we are putting on the streets. Professor Alex Vitale and so many others on this call today talked about the need to redirect the money to the root causes of the harms in our community. We cannot afford to spend more money to put 100,000 more police officers on the streets. And so we have a letter sign-on campaign that we're asking each and every one of you to sign on to. I'm gonna drop that in the chat. And as we close, none of this, absolutely none of this would be possible without the amazing speakers that we have today. So please join me in thanking our amazing panel of expert speakers. And that list includes, we have my very favorite and #1 Public Housing Tenant Association president, Ms. Beverly McFarland. Taylon had some communication issues and wasn't able to join us, but please give some love to Taylon Murphy. We have Professor Babe Howe from CUNY School of Law. We have the person with the coolest name ever, MK from Brooklyn Defender Services. We got my brother from another mother, Professor Fareed Nassad Hayat. And last but certainly not least, we have Alex Vitale. Thank you all for all the amazing information that you shared with us today. But even more important is the people who came together to make this possible. You know who you are, but I'm dropping some names. Joe Smart, thank you so much for being our fearless leader. MK, thank you so much for helping us organize and coordinate. I know I'm forgetting people, so forgive me. I'm gonna get you guys off. You know who you are. Don't kill me if I forgot your name. Thank you all and see you soon on Wednesday. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Everyone have a good night. See you guys Wednesday.
Good night.
Thanks, Josmar. Bye, Ms. McFarland.
Bye.
Bye, Marquise.